Hi everyone, this is Rohini. Welcome back to the Seeds podcast. With me is my co host Chris. Thank you for joining us on episode 2 as we continue discussing early childhood education. In the first episode, we discussed the importance of the time period between when a child is born, even before the child is born, actually, to up to when they turn 6 or 7 years of age. We discussed the importance of the first 1,000 days to the first 3,000 days of a child's life. And Chris even went into telling us three different stories of three different babies in different contexts, with different interactions with the people around them, and the different stimulation that they were getting, and therefore the impact on that stimulation on their early lives. Today, we're going to get into discussing, as promised, the different domains of development in early childhood. Chris, can you introduce what that means to us?
Yes, so Rohini, when I say the word development, what is the first thing that comes into your mind? Just the term development.
Other, like synonyms that I can think of are forming, evolving, changing.
Yes, exactly. And that is exactly what happens to a child as the child is growing. When I have to think of the terms development, very similar to yours, maybe I would think of children walking because, like you said, when children are evolving, first they crawl, then they start walking. Before they start talking, they are babbling. So these are the different areas, I would say, in which the child develops. So a synonym to the domains of development would be the areas of development. So just to get in a few technical terms there, um, some of the domains of development of the child is cognitive development, then is language development, then would be creative, like the creative side of development. Then would be the fine and gross motor skills. So motor skills is another development of the child. And then is a social and emotional development. So these are the five different domains of development of any individual from when they are born till they grow. These are the different areas in which they can develop.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing those really, five technical domains of development. I kind of want to start with the simplest one for me to understand. What is motor development?
So motor by the term itself is movement, right? So the movement of the child's hands and legs, their ability to crawl, their ability to walk, their ability to hold objects, to gain grip in their hand, to when they have to start writing, the ability to hold a pencil. What goes into each of this is the motor skills, as simple as that.
Yeah, I have heard about fine motor skills and gross motor skills. I would suppose that fine motor skills would come, for writing and grabbing, and gross motor skills would be crawling and running. Would that be correct to say?
Exactly, yes.
Awesome. Next, do you want to talk about social and emotional learning?
Actually, that's a very tricky part and a tricky skill because I think even as adults, that's something that we are trying to understand, we are trying to master. But the simple terms of social and emotional learning, and I think over the past 2-3 years, this has gained much more attraction because the more we've been moving towards academic studies and children learning about subjects, we forgot the aspect of social and emotional studies and learning. So social and emotional learning means the understanding of emotions. Do children know what it means to be sad? Do children know what it means to be happy? Are they able to understand their own feelings? Are they aware of their feelings? Are they aware of feelings of others? So, just an awareness and being able to manage these emotions is social and emotional learning in very simple terms.
I'm really glad that this skill is, gaining traction and gaining attention at such an early age, especially as you said in the past 2-3 years. Things like self-awareness and mindfulness and all those other fashionable terms today in the adult world, they're really important life skills. And the sooner we start, I think the more effectively we'll be able to apply them in our lives. So very closely related, I would think, just by the terms, the creative development and cognitive development. What are those?
I can first touch upon creative development. Is each one of us have a creative side. Some children love to draw, some people like to sing, some people like to play. When I say play, maybe drama. There's a different creative side to every person. It needs to be explored, right? Some people can speak well, while some people can, dance well. These are all the creative sides. And how do we explore this at an early age is something that caregivers and teachers are working towards. So this is the creative side of the child, right? Like, for example, I would say in a classroom, is there time for children to free play? And when they are free playing, it's a lot of their imaginative skills that come into play, right? You see children playing with dolls, holding them together, making names. Like each doll has its own name. Then you may see children playing with paper, making things out of paper. So, in the process of creative skills, there's a lot of other skills that's attached to it. One is the fine and gross motor skills, because when children are making things, their hands are moving, their feet move. When they're playing, their imagination is sharpened, which will come back to cognitive skills, which I'll touch upon a little later. So, there are a lot of skills that are interlinked, I would say, because no skill is individually learned. So even in creative skills, you will see cognitive skills, you will see motor skills that's being built. You will also see social and emotional skills, because when they are playing with their friends, they try to imitate things that are happening at their homes. Emotions that are happening at home come alive. So yeah, this is a very, very important skill to be touched upon at home and even in classrooms. So yeah, at a gist, it's just about exploring that creative side in every child. Yes, so we've been speaking about motor development, we've been speaking about creative development, social and emotional development. But one thing that binds all of this together is the cognitive development. Just to briefly define what cognitive development is, it's the ability in how children think, in how children explore the environment around them, the knowledge that allows them to problem solve, to make decisions, to think critically. All of this is the cognitive development. So, now if I have to compare and say how this could be an overarching development, is if a child's motor skills are being built, right, and if the child is crawling, the child's mind to be able to understand not to hit a wall is a decision making skill that the child is making. That is where cognition comes into play. When the child's social and emotional development is happening, and when the child is using emotions in a play, and the child knows that he should not hurt his friend, he's making a conscious decision to do that. That is where cognitive development comes to play. Creative skills, when the child is singing, for example, the child needs to modulate voice at some places. That's when they're using that skill to ensure where to do what. So there's where the cognitive development plays a key role. All of these developments are required individually, but they all are interlinked together. One that we did not speak so far of is language development, which is something that we'll talk about a little more in detail today. Is also in language development, the cognition to use language to be able to understand which are the different languages is where the cognitive mind plays. So yeah, this is about the cognitive development of the child.
So that brings us to the largest section of our episode today, which is language development. I have a bunch of questions for you, Chris, around language development. I'll start with the first one. So many Indian children, especially, will grow up in multilingual environments. I've read that this can delay development of language. Is this true? And what does it mean to grow up in a multilingual environment?
I don't think it delays development of language. Children until the age of, it's a very interesting fact that children until the age of 7 can learn as many languages as they can, and can also master that language in its own accent. So this means that if I speak a foreign language when I am, say, within the age of 7, I can also speak it like a native French speaker. So also to say, in India, like you said, that we live in a multilingual country, if I speak 4 languages at home, I can master all the 4 languages in its native form. You must have seen that a lot of, at least I had friends who had nannies at home who would speak a foreign language, which a language that was foreign even to their parents, but the child would still understand and can respond in that foreign language. That's to say that the child could understand the home language, the language in school, and also the language the nanny spoke at home. So it does not delay development of the child, but I would rather say it increases the scope of speaking one more language.
Can children distinguish between the different languages that they're exposed to? And what can parents potentially do to support the development of these multiple languages?
I'd like to take the second question first. I think parents can just speak any number of languages. That's the best support parents can give. But as early as, say, 1 or less than 1, children cannot tell between different languages. So for them, all of it is the same. And if a parent uses 2 or 3 different languages in one sentence, it can confuse the child because the child does not know which is English or which is any other language, right? So, I mean, this is my personal opinion that when a parent uses one complete sentence, use that sentence in one language and then the other sentence in any other language. Because as the child grows older, when the child is able to tell between the 2 different languages, he or she knows which language is what. But as an advice to support their children, speak as much as you can in different languages. Encourage your child to learn the home language. Encourage your child to learn a foreign language or any number of languages for that matter of fact, if your child has the taste for languages. And not just that, if they are exposed to as many languages growing up, as they grow older, they develop automatically a taste for languages. So you must have noticed that, at least I have noticed that friends who are my age pick up languages really quick. That's because they were exposed to languages, multiple languages at a younger age, and hence the knack.
That sounds amazing, frankly. But on the flip side, I'm now thinking, what about children in our country and then also in multiple, developed nations that speak only one language? What about children growing up in monolingual environments?
I can actually think of very few countries that are monolingual now because globally we all speak English, and in many of the English speaking countries also they have developed, or rather they've had policies to learn at least one foreign language, either French or German. But definitely in monolingual countries, I wouldn't say that they are at a disadvantage when compared to children speaking multiple languages, but definitely it's a little slower because as you're growing up, if you have the exposure to one language, your mind does not build the syntax to learn new languages, as simple as to say, because this does not mean that they cannot learn a new language. The ability to learn it might be a little slower. If I have to think of a graph, and if the graph is rising till the age of, say, 7 or 12, after a certain age, it just plateaus. It does not go down, it just plateaus. So when I learn a new language as I grow older, it takes a little time for me to go up that graph as opposed to someone who has the taste to learn new languages.
So, Chris, so far we've been speaking only about listening and speaking skills. What about reading and writing?
It's very interesting that we are touching upon reading and writing, and there's been like a lot of myth, or rather not myth, but a lot of conversation and dialogue around children going to school and starting to write at a very early age. But this is my thinking, and this is something that we have learned even as children, the thumb rule of LSR and W, which is listen, speak, read, and write. So when a baby is born, I'm sure you wouldn't have heard a baby speak, right? They take some time to start speaking. And while they are taking the time to start speaking, they're actually listening. And while listening, they are building their vocabulary and their ability to speak. So the first stage, I would say, of even writing is listening. You first listen, then you start speaking. So you're building the vocabulary of things that you have listened to. And then when parents sit with their children to read as early as, say, 3 or 4 months old, when they're sitting with their children to read picture books, they show pictures so they can map what they speak to what they see by reading books with their children. That is when the ability to reading develops, when they sit with their children, reading books to their children. You must have noticed some children do not find reading a very pleasant thing to do. Probably their exposure to reading must have been much lesser to children who have been exposed to much more picture books and then wordy books, etc. Then the last stage of the learning process of language is writing, when children have already built skills which we've spoken of earlier, which are the motor skills, the motor development of the child. Once there is a scaffolded building of these motor skills, children start writing. So it's a whole process which starts all the way from listening, moving to speaking, reading, and then writing.
Perhaps in developing countries, but particularly in India. And I know this was my experience in the classroom and perhaps in yours as well. Parents really push their kids to write in notebooks. Whether they're able to speak the language or read the language does not seem to be as important. It almost becomes immaterial as long as children are copying from the board. But then children are also really good at drawing, right? They'll just copy the shapes from the board, and then what does that mean for the writing? But anyway, is it advisable to push them to write so early? And when is a good time for children to start writing actually?
I would say that definitely no child should be pushed. No child should be forced to do when they're not yet ready to start writing. But I remember I went to school at 2.5. I don't know whether I was able to write or not, but it could be injustice done to a child if the child is not ready to write. Like I mentioned earlier, the fine and the gross motor skills of the child needs to be developed. If the wrist formation of even holding a pencil is not done right, the child may not enjoy the practice of writing. It might be a burden for the child to write. In Indian culture, in most of the customs and rituals, you must have heard of this tradition called the Akshara Abhyasa, which is done about after 2 years. Have you heard of it, Rohini?
Yeah, I think one of my nieces just went through it or something. Yeah.
Right. So the tradition of having this ceremony in the family is to introduce writing, where they ask the child, they hold the hand of the child and ask them to write on rice. Right. So this is an introduction to writing, where you hold the child's hand, do not give a pencil or a pen to a child, and just allow the child to just move their wrist just to get used to how it is to write. Right. There are different activities caregivers and teachers can do with the child at that age, as early as 1.5, is just put flour or put powder or put rice in front of the child and just ask the child to make shapes into this without just pencil and pen. That's the whole ceremony of Aksharabhyasa, where it's not just introducing the child to writing, but also telling the parent how do you make your child write, and don't just use a pencil as an initial start to writing. So I would say don't push the child. If the child is ready, the child will start writing. But as a caregiver, this is what you can do to support the child to start writing.
Great. And actually, I have a follow-up question going back to reading. How soon is too soon to start reading to a child? I know there are babies, if you put a book in front of them, they're likely to tear it apart and things like that. But is that okay? Should you be open to? When do we start with board books? When do we progress to picture books and so on?
I would say there's no late age to start reading. When my friend delivered a baby, I think the first gift I gave her was a picture book. And by nature, children are not destructive and they will not tear pages out if they've not yet built their motor skills to do that. And if parents have started teaching their children how to use a book even before that, children will not destroy it. Because if and children by nature are very possessive of their things, it's how you deal with the child to take care of their own objects. They will, so they will not tear the pages for sure unless they don't know what to do with it. So I would say as early as few months, parents can sit with their children and hold flip pages with their child, because flipping pages also builds a lot of motor skills. Just holding the paper and moving it also develops your fingers, develops your wrist, because it takes a lot of energy to do that for the child. So as early as, I would say, a couple of months, when the child is able to recognize colors in a book, which happens quite early, the parent can sit with the child and just read out to the child stories. So I wouldn't say it's never too late. It's always good to start early. So yeah, a few months, when the child is 2 3 months, you can just start reading to the child. The child's attention span is going to be very less, but that's okay. Till the child is able to pay attention, you can sit with the book with your child.
So we've been speaking about language development, in particular about listening, speaking, reading, and writing. But how do these things actually play out when a baby is growing?
A very interesting fact, I don't know if you and all the speakers here have noticed, all across the world, babies sound the same when they're born. Their babble is very much the same, and it only starts changing when they start adapting to the environment. So, the way vowels are spoken in different languages is how children start picking up their language. That is when they pick up language. So, babies try communicating by crying. They start searching for a voice that is very familiar to them. They start cooing, and their cooing is actually in the sounds of vowels and gurgling kind of sounds. Then slowly they start babbling, and when they're babbling, they start adding consonants to the vowels. Babies start paying attention around 9 months. When the baby starts, when they turn 9 months old, they start paying attention to the same object. When an adult points out an object to them, they start looking at it. So that is how the language starts developing for a baby. Then, when they become toddlers, that is about 12 months to 2 years of age. So, for toddlers, between the age of 12 months to 2 years, they start using gestures. They use few words to express themselves. And by the end of almost 2 years, children have the capacity to use up to 200 words. Now, when I think about the previous episode recording that we did, Rohini, there was a story of this child named Pune, and Pune was already 2 years old. There was no stimulation for Pune. Pune had the ability to use 200 words, but Pune was not able to use words at all. So it does not only end up to what children can do by that certain age, but what is allowing the child to do that as well. So by 2 years, children can use about 200 words. They can start combining two words. So you must have heard babies say, I Chris, I Rohini, or you, babe, me, biscuit. So they cannot form complete sentences, but they can just put two words together that make sense for themselves. And at the age of 2, their vocabulary starts rapidly increasing. They start figuring out what words mean. They start speaking in simple sentences, may not be grammatically correct, but then they start making sentences, maybe 3-word sentences like I go market, mommy pick up, these kind of words that form sentences which might make sense. By the age of 3, they try to start using tenses, but maybe not correctly. For example, I standed, or they use foots instead of feet. They just start, they know the concept of tenses, that if I add an s it becomes plural, but they don't know where to use and how to use tenses, but then there is an effort towards that. So parents can, for example, parents and caregivers can start using tenses when the child is about 2.5, 3 years old, because children can understand grammar by then. By the age of 4, children know prepositions, and this is true for all languages. It's not just English language, but for any language. At the age of 4, they start using prepositions like in, on, under. They start using correct verb tenses. And at the age of 5, their vocabulary can hold a capacity of at least 1,500 words. They start using complex sentences. They're defining simple words. So, yeah, this is how their vocabulary and their language grows over the first few years of their life.
The picture that you just kind of painted for me is extremely useful, and it's forming a mental map for me of perhaps where a baby ought to be in their development, especially pertaining to language. So say I'm a parent, and I've been listening to you, and I do everything by the book. I am constantly interacting with the baby, and I'm constantly stimulating the baby. I've read to the baby, and I've spoken to the baby, and so on. But still, I find that there is, maybe the baby is not saying words at 9 months. Maybe at 2 years, the baby is not yet formed a simple sentence. Should I be worried? And if I am worried, what should I do?
That's a beautiful question, Rohini. And I think a lot of parents start getting worried really easily. And knowing information can also be worrisome sometimes. But my advice to the parent would be not to be worried, but to just be aware about your child, to be aware about what your child can and cannot do. I would not say worry is the solution. I would just say being aware. This actually brings me to a story that I heard a couple of months ago. The setting of the story was in Australia, and a parent had taken her, I think, 7 months old baby. And by the time the child is 7 to 9 months, they can start recognizing very easily. They start looking and glaring at people. They turn towards voices, and they're communicating through noises and through their sight. They start communicating. But this one particular mother was really worried that her baby was not even looking at her. So as a new mother, it creates a lot of anxiety that, my own child is not looking at me, my own child is not responding to me. So she quickly went to the service center, and she told the helper there that my baby is not responding to me, my baby is not talking to me, there's no communication. Just like how you said, because the child is already 7 months, the child should be babbling, the child should be making noises, and the baby wasn't. So the helper there asked the mother, what do you do to make your baby smile? So Rohini, if I ask you this question, I know it's a hypothetical question, but what do you think the mother might do to make the baby smile?
Smile at the baby herself, make the baby laugh in some way.
Right. So the mother here, tried to do everything that any mother could. Like, she tickled the baby's feet, she laughed as much as she could, she, held the baby up and down, and the baby wouldn't nudge. The baby wouldn't smile. The baby wouldn't even look at the mother back. And that definitely made the mother even more sad. And she said to the helper, see, this is all I'm doing, and my baby is not even looking at me. So then the helper asked the mother again, what do you do to gain your baby's attention? And then the mother again did the same thing. She tried to look at the baby wherever the baby was looking. She tried to snap her fingers. She tried to make babbling noises, but the baby wasn't doing anything. Why do you think this was happening, Rohini? What do you think? Why do you think the baby was not looking at the mother?
I don't know. It's a real mystery to me, to be honest, and it's making me panic just to listen. I don't know what it would have meant to be in the mother's position.
Right. So I know. So a lot of mothers get anxious because of this, and the parents think that something is wrong with the child. But I know it's not needless to say, but then this mother also was very anxious, and she asked the helper, this is what I'm doing. And the helper then said, start imitating about what your child is doing. Imitate your child, copy what your child is doing. And suddenly the child started getting hiccups. So then the mother said, my child is not doing anything. How do I imitate? So then the helper said, your child is having hiccups right now. Why don't you do that? And then the mother was quite surprised, and she said, okay. And then she started, like, taking hiccups herself. And then the child quickly turned and looked at the mother. She caught her mother's attention immediately because the mother tried to make a noise that the child was making. And this is what a response means. All this while, the mother tried to make the child respond to her. But here, now the mother is responding to the child, and this is, it's a concept called responsive caregiving, which means that the caregiver responds to the child. In a lot of situations, we make the child respond to the parents. The child might just get bored, the child might not even be interested, and that's why the child loses interest. So when the caregiver does what the child wants to do, is when the child is glued to the caregiver. And the mother was really surprised. And then the helper continued following up with the mother. And then the mother said, now I have no problem with my child. Now I'm able to communicate with my child. And it was a really beautiful reading. It was actually a video that I had seen a couple of months ago. And it just took me back to that particular piece when you just asked me about should the parent get worried. I would say just be aware. It's not a worry.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Responsive caregiving sounds really interesting.
It is. It's a whole concept in itself, and a lot of organizations, a lot of schools, and a lot of parents are actually turning to this new framework. And we'll talk about it a little more in detail, I think, in the coming episodes. But yeah, this is what responsive caregiving is. It is about the caregiver responding to the child, and it's a very beautiful concept. We'll definitely dig deeper into it.
Perfect. I would really be interested to get into responsive caregiving as a topic. Additionally, to our listeners, I want to say that some of the resources that we're using, they are open source and you should be able to access them. And in our previous episode and also in this episode when Chris spoke about Pune and the different stories from the last episode, they're all from a Save the Children book. We'll reference that book in a link. Chris, coming back to the question I actually asked you before about whether parents should get worried, and you answered it really, really well. But I want to ask it again. What if there really is a delay? We don't know. We've done everything, but say the mother had to go to a service center and she found a solution in this case, which is a great thing to do. What would we do here in India?
I would again say not to be worried. Again, my response to it would be to be aware. But there's a lot of help. Say, for example, if the child is already 2 years old and the child isn't speaking, it's nothing to be worried, but it's to know that, yeah, my child is 2 years old and is unable to speak sentences or words. Then I would take my child to the pediatrician, or I would take my child to a speech therapist, and it's okay to ask for help. So if you know that your child is unable to do a certain thing at a certain age, it's all right to consult. So yeah, it's just to, it's good to be informed, but let not the information take you to be worried about a certain thing.
So, what would you say are, some maybe top 5 things that a new parent should keep in mind?
One would be enjoy parenting. Two would be happy. Three would be aware of your child. There is actually no 5 points to parenting, or there's no five top points, because I think I've repeated myself, and I will again. Just be aware of your child, and I think most importantly, be aware of your parenting. Enjoy parenthood. There is no one size fits all.
As usual, Chris, this has been such great learning for me. Thank you so much. I had so much fun exploring language development with you. In the next episode, Chris and I will be discussing The Whole Brain Child. It's a book by Dr. Siegel and Dr. Bryson.
I'm really excited too, Ro. I think having this discussion is also making me more aware about children, about parenting, and about just development in itself. So I'm having a great time doing this with you.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
looking
you
forward to our
again.
next episode. See you
Yes.
all.
Yes. See you. Bye.
Bye.